afternoon. Welcome to the Quilter Cheviot Theatre. I'm Joe Crowley. Thank you very much for joining us. Lots of people waving. Have we got some friends and family in the audience? I suspect we have. We are going to have this session on Natural England's National Nature Reserves. So whether you are passionate about wildlife or just like escaping into some of England's wildest or most beautiful landscapes, hopefully this session can give you a few ideas about where to explore next. And to inspire you, I'm joined by four very, very passionate people who work on or across these national nature reserves. They are Dagmar Junghans, Robin Hansen, James Giles, and Julie Merritt. Round of applause, please. Whoa. You can always spot the family or the friends or the hotspots or the colleagues. So let's get going. First of all, just to give us a sense of what you do, each of you maybe in sort of 20, 30 seconds, tell us where you work in the country and what you do on these reserves.
Okay, so am I
Up to your mouth.
Up to my mouth.
There we go, nice and close, yeah.
Right. So I cover the whole of the southwest, looking across all our national nature reserves in the southwest, and I'm also involved in more strategic work nationally.
Great.
So
Robin?
I have just left this area, so the Thames area, to go over to Kent, and I run the team there. So I'm kind of the equivalent of kind of an area manager. I'm senior National Nature Reserve Manager, so I facilitate the team. Occasionally I'm on the ground when I'm lucky. A lot of the time I'm helping that team get the work done on the ground.
Great, so you two are quite senior, aren't you? You oversee quite a few of these reserves. James?
Well, I'm a little less senior. I cover an outstandingly beautiful National Nature Reserve down in Darkest, Surrey, so Thursley National Nature Reserve.
Thursley, fantastic. And Julie?
I'm down in Somerset, based on the Somerset levels. I'm a reserves warden, so kind of lowest of the low. No, it's the best job actually, because I get to be outdoors all the time and on the ground and hands-on. And I was a volunteer for a long time at the reserve that I now work at, so I know it really well and very attached to it.
Great. You are experts in your field. Just make sure you keep the microphones nice and close. That's my theatre tip to you. Dagmar, start us off. I mean, tell us how these national nature reserves came into being for people who don't know.
Okay, so national nature reserves really came from some very far-sighted thinking around the time of the Second World War, and somehow people through that period had the vision to see that the countryside and wildlife was going to undergo massive periods of change after the war, with post-war development, changes in agriculture. And a really important Act of Parliament was passed in 1949, which set up national nature reserves, national trails and national parks all at once. And obviously national trails are for access, national parks are great big swathes of landscape, multifunctional, but national nature reserves are really about protecting the very, very best nature sites, managing them for nature, for the purposes of conservation, as a scientific resource. If you read the original documents, it talks about outdoor laboratories, and then as it's rather quaintly termed, places for quiet recreation. So you know, at that time it was very, very much seen as a very genteel. You know, occasional visitors would be allowed in. These days, it's very, very different, and we'll probably talk about that later.
And just quick show of hands then. How many of you have explored national nature reserves across the country? Oh, wow, very good.
Okay.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, I hope through this session, we'll also be able to make some suggestions as well. I'm going to put these guys on the spot at some point and make them suggest a few you may not have heard of. And I think you've all got a great handout which puts as a map, and dotted across that map are some of the sites that we might be talking about. So we'll come to that. So that's the idea. That's how they were created, and this brief for nature, for people, for science. So, Robin, tell us a bit about what they can do for people. How important are they for people?
Priceless. So literally, in my opinion, priceless. These are our natural heritage. So these are okay, I'm going to go, because I'm so passionate about this, I'll keep it brief. But if you've ever been out in any natural place and you've had the wow factor of nature, in my opinion, national nature reserves do that Obviously, the other places can do that, but national nature reserves are fantastic at doing that. Just either the view or some of the wildlife that you see, or some of the just being out in these places. And yeah, there's an absolute wow factor, which is fantastic. It's why we love them. It's what gets the hooks into people. And they're also really, really good for us. So there's loads of evidence that I could talk for a long time about of how good they are for us in terms of well-being.
Physical, mental, yeah.
Mental, physical, loads of stuff there. So that's something a part of it that I'm extremely interested in. So I'll just check that. Yeah, lots of, any questions about that? Yeah, really cool.
James, tell us a bit about the science booth and outdoor laboratories. I mean, what would happen, for example, at your site to fulfill that remit?
Many things. One of the underpinning things the National Nature Reserves were set up for was the outdoor laboratory, the research Dagmar mentioned briefly. There's a lot of citizen science. Obviously, through the BBC, we see things like the Great Butterfly Count, and we have a lot of volunteers in the reserve, and we do surveys with those, looking at sort of invertebrates, birds in the evening. There's a particular species called the nightjar. We all go out at the wee small hours and go out and look for those and count them. We have a lot of research projects coming through from undergraduates through to PhDs. Using local, obviously my reserve's not, less than an hour from London, so we can encourage all sorts coming out. We've had guys looking at a thing called pollen stratification through the peat layer, going back looking at pollen records 10,000 years plus ago.
Wow.
We've had people looking at a little process, a thing called a mycorrhizal association, which is where the roots of plants go and have a partnership with fungus. So we've had Kew, Imperial College London, Natural History Museum, and obviously the general public through things like iRecord can get involved, submit data. So yeah, as Robin was saying with the well-being, it's all things for all people again. So,
and just a bit on that pollen sort of census through the ages. That just tells us the plants, the trees, the natural habitat that were around. It's like a sort of historical record going way back.
Exactly that. Yeah. So obviously the site was sort of periglacial time. So after the ice age, about 13,000 years ago, it started to melt and the plants started to grow. So looking through this layer, it's that piece of history in time, and you can see exactly what species were there and how they've changed and how man influenced it. Now, obviously, as we came in as Bronze Age and started to slash and burn agriculture, you can see how these things have changed through the eons. It's amazing.
Julie, you started off, I know probably some of these guys did as well, but as a volunteer, and you've worked your way up. So just tell us a bit about people who volunteer for Natural England, how important that is to the organisation and these nature reserves.
Yeah, there's a lot more volunteers than members of staff, I think. I mean, we are so lucky, the amount of people that come and give their time. And it's a whole age range and a whole mix of, different people from different types of society. So we have a lot of retired people come and just, we have to do lots of kind of scrub clearance because we're restoring grasslands on my sites. So people really like to come and have the exercise and meet other like-minded people and enjoy giving to the community and being part of something. And I also run lots of groups for families. So Forest School for all the family, it's called. Forest School's quite a popular thing these days, but sometimes it's not. It's just about bringing everyone in the family out and having that space in nature and a time to connect and learn a bit about the wildlife that's there. And I also run groups called Young Wardens, so that's for teenagers, sort of 11 to 17-year-olds. And some of it's just for enjoyment, and other aspects are like, people that would like to go into that type of work and getting practical experience. So there really is something for everybody, and similar to yourself, we do a lot of citizen science projects and teaching people natural history skills, which people don't just pick up anymore because we actually, in most of our daily lives, don't have that much contact with the natural environment. So we're a really important hub for that sort of thing, for keeping people connected.
Yeah, and so many of our talks here actually over these 4 days seem to be focusing on how people reconnect, whether it's teaching kids about how food is made or insects or nature or valuing nature to conserve it. So these are the places people can go to explore firsthand. I'm going to put you all on the spot. It might be easier for you two because you sort of work on a specific site, but I want you to, this is sort of Natural World meets Dragon's Den maybe. I want you to sort of pitch to these lovely people a really special nature reserve that's dear to you and why they should go and check it out some weekend this summer. Dagmar, start us off.
Well, probably my most special place that I'm lucky enough to be involved in is called the Undercliffs at Lyme Regis. It's historical in many ways. It's a very dynamic area of cliff just outside Lyme Regis. It was the site of where Mary Anning found her first very famous fossil. It's part of the Jurassic Coast, and it's a cross between the Jurassic Park landscape and a sort of a seascape as well. So you can see 150 years ago, half the cliffs fell away. And since then, nobody has farmed them and nobody has managed. And so you have this ravine landscape that's full of wild woodland. And the Southwest Coast Path runs right through the middle, so there's a safe way to explore that landscape. And then when you get down to the sea and you get down to Lyme Regis, if you turn right, you can go onto this amazing bit of beach, which is an ammonite pavement. So it's flat rock, and you can stand on creatures that were still swimming around however many million years ago, old and far older than your pollen record. So that's the Lyme Regis Undercliff. It is just fantastic.
This is what I was hoping, a bit of healthy competition. Survival of the fittest is a natural thing. Go on then, Robin, take it away.
So I'd talk about Thursley. No, I'm not going to. I just used to winding you up. So I'm expecting some people are local. So I would say about Aston Rowant, which if you know the M40, junction 6 or junction 5, and you're driving along and you get the cutting. It's the only part where there's that cutting through, and that runs through the middle of the National Nature Reserve. And I could give a lot of the background information like Dagmar has, but I'm not going to, because these places are different things for different people at different times. So I would say find one of the car parks, because there's several, and don't try to not go with any preconceptions, don't go with anything, just go with yourself and someone you'd like to share it to, and then just walk around, find a quiet spot, sit down, shut your eyes, listen for about 5 minutes. So there's loads of interpretation on the site. There's loads that you can learn about the site. We've got wonderful volunteer who goes around putting the little leaflets that will tell you about the site and tell you all about it. But I would say, for me, go and feel the site. And that's not something I can tell you what you're going to get from that experience. That's the adventure that you're going to get if you go there. That's the challenge. If you don't like it, I can give you my email address and you can complain to me.
And that's an interesting point. Is there a lot of help and guidance for people when they turn up? You know, if they want to find out more, you know, are there sort of signs or people on hand?
So most of the main entrances, it depends on the site. So some sites are completely open, they're commons. And there's so many different entrances that it'll take you a while, follow a path, and you'll find something. For somewhere like Aston Rowant, where there's a number of entry points, there's a big map, you know, orientation map, giving you some detail about the site, so showing where you are, where you can go, routes you can follow, a bit about the site, and then some of the sites will have dispensers, maybe, with giving more information. Aston Rowant, if that's not enough of a hook to get you to go to Aston Rowant, there is an amazing nature trail with some sculptures on it, and you wind these things up and you click different things, and it will give you various songs, poems, accounts. It's very cool.
Wow, there we go. So that was more of a Dragon's Den pitch, wasn't it? Not the mysterious, just go and see. Great. James, I think I know what you're going to pitch, but you can tell us that. But also I'd point out that you're quite a photographer, aren't you? So some of these pictures we're going through, some of them will be James's. I think there's a list of credits out there. I know the screens are a bit reflective. Sorry about that. But hopefully there's a few images as we go through to inspire. But James, go on then. Give us one that's dear to you.
Sure. Well, I have to talk about where I work, because I'll take a little further south. If you leave the M40 cutting, Robin's mentioned, head down to the M25, deal with the traffic, turn off the A3, keep going for another hour, you hit a little village called Thursley, and behind that village is a wonderful heathland. About 1,000 acres, the heathland is. I always say 1,000 acres, you can say 400 hectares, 1,000 sounds a lot better. Yeah, plug it well. Yeah, so you come out to what we call really outside London, you're 1 hour from London. I mean, we can call it a wilderness. It's a sweeping area of open heathland, mixed scrub. There's a wonderful piece of habitat called a valley mire, colloquially known as the bog. Not quite so romantic. But no, I mean, the species, to me, it's dear to me. I've been there for, best part of 20 years working now. And within the commuter belt, that is Guildford area, the IT specialists, you have this vast heathland. teeming with wildlife, and on the bog itself you have a whole suite of other creatures. Wonderful for dragonflies, something like 26 breeding species of dragonfly on the reserve. Out on the dry heathland we have all 6 native reptiles, including the very rare sand lizard and smooth snake, which not many get to see, but they are stunning. On the drier parts we'll have amazing species of bees, solitary bees and wasps, not living in a hive like your honeybee, but they'll live in their own little nest burrows, and they'll feed on the pollen on the plants around, and some are a thing called kleptoparasitic, so they'll actually hang out on other species. So where the species has taken its prey item, laid its egg on it, this species will sneak in while it's not looking down the hole, and whoops, I've laid my egg in. So all the benefit, no digging the hole, no hunting, and they're quite prolific on a heathland.
Wow. And dragonflies?
Yep, lots of different dragonflies, all sorts of wonderful names, darters and hawkers and skimmers. Yeah, like I say, 26 different species. Then there's the damsels, and there's also demoiselle, which is kind of somewhere between the two, a little bit bigger than a damsel, a little smaller than a dragonfly. Beautiful iridescent colours, watching the aerial battles as they're hunting for other insects and defending their territories is pretty special.
Fantastic.
So I'm no longer James's line manager, but I'm still going to throw a challenge out and dump him in it. And I'm happy to give out James's email address as well. So if anyone likes the idea of doing a guided walk, I'm dumping you straight in it. I reckon if we get enough people together, somehow, in some way, I would say I love going around with James, because some of the stuff he's just come out with, he's just an encyclopedia of that for Thursley and other sites. Absolutely fascinating to be out with him, and really, really fun.
Do you want 20 quid later?
What?
Do you want a £20 note later?
So anyone's in Surrey or near Thursley, that's a great idea. And Julie, come on then, pitch us one that's very dear to you.
Getting lost in Thursley there. I'm mostly based, like I said, on the Somerset Levels, and the site I look after is Shapwick Heath, which is about 500 hectares of wetland. So wetland's a whole mixture of things. There's huge lakes, there's reed beds. We're right underneath Glastonbury Tor, so from a lot of the bird hides, you look out across the lakes and reed beds with the Tor in the background, which is absolutely beautiful sight. There's also wet woodland, there's ancient grasslands, and on our reserve we have a scheduled ancient monument called the Sweet Track, which is the first ever Neolithic trackway in the whole of Europe. Unfortunately, you can't see it because it's buried deep in the peat. It's the anaerobic conditions in the peat that preserve it. But we recently, about 5 years ago, made a footpath along the route that it took, because originally the whole area was marsh, and these trackways would cross the marsh from different areas of higher ground. So we've made a footpath along it, and you get huge Greater Tussock sedges and royal fern, which is the biggest fern that you get in the country. And it really is, it has such a primeval feel. I don't think there's anywhere I know that really feels quite like it. And you get, it's very good for butterflies, and you get, it creates like a little glade in the wood, so you get lots of things that land there. And we get the raft spider, which is like one of the biggest spiders in Britain. But they're just along the pathway. It's not like these rare species are really, really hard to find. So it's really, really accessible for people. And I like that, because sometimes you feel like you have to trek to the top of a mountain or the deepest valley to sort of find these rare things. But actually some of them are really easy to see if you just take the time to go there. So I have to just mention our other star species, which is the bittern. Don't know if has anyone ever heard of a bittern? Hands up if you've seen a bittern.
But I always thought it was Norfolk. I thought it was the Broads. I didn't think it was over in Somerset.
No, they were nearly extinct in Somerset. And in the area where we have our reserve, it's not just the Natural England Reserve, there's a lot of other organisations that have reserves, so it's a really enormous area of wetland, similar in size to Norfolk, maybe a little bit bigger. And one of the species that we've tried to bring back, and we have been very successful in bringing back, is the bittern. So we now have 46 boomers that our volunteers have counted last spring, which is still coming up, and they make this incredible mating call in the spring, which is...
What does it sound like, Julie?
What we send everyone out looking for. Okay, so I do a good impression, so...
I don't know if there's any in Oxfordshire, but they'll be flying in now. Yeah, round of applause. Getting very excited.
You can hear it from about 1.5 miles away, so it's quite impressive.
That is incredible. And it's only occurred to me while you've been speaking that I've actually been to the Sweet Track and filmed it for Country Tracks years ago. And as well as the nature, it's this great sense of human history there. I mean, I remember,
exactly.
I think it was an axe head that was found that had come all the way from the Alps, and they found it there. And
a
it'd been preserved.
jadeite head,
Yeah, amazing. Okay, fantastic. It did occur to me while I was listening to that, and may have done to you as well. I don't know if we can solve it, but we'll try. There's a bit of a north-south divide going on. We haven't given too many ideas further north. So between you, can you come up with anything a bit further north that people may like to go and see? Any dramatic sites, any that are good for specialist wildlife? I know this is putting you on the spot because I know you've all worked in the south. Any ideas? If not, we'll move on. Dagmar, try us.
There's some wonderful sites up in the Pennines, the sort of North Yorkshire area. Some on the limestone country, the Ingleborough, places around there. They're very, very different. Famous for its limestone pavement and the rare plants that live in the, I think it's the Grikes. I can't remember which way around the Clinton Grike. One's a stopper, one's a gap. But I don't know enough of up there on the holidays, I'm afraid. But thanks for the challenge.
I visited York recently for a conference all about preserving floodplain meadows. So where rivers spill over and the sort of rich grassland that you get there. And what was lovely about it is that you can actually walk from York city centre out along the river to these beautiful meadows. And they have a species called the tansy beetle there, which is only found there. And they're these big, beautiful, greeny, iridescent beetles. And that's really a lovely site and very accessible.
Fantastic. Now, I do want to leave a bit of time to ask a few questions. We'll have a few questions from the audience. But let's just quickly talk about how we manage these sites. I say quickly, it's a very big subject. But how actively do you manage them? You know, do you allow, you know, do you target a particular species? Are there unintended consequences if you get too involved in managing? Do you let nature take its course? What do you do? What's the strategy?
It very much depends on the type of habitat. We've spoken about heathlands, we've spoken about wetlands, we've spoken about woodlands and short grasslands. One of the underpinning things for the reserves, you'll tend to have a management plan, which is kind of a signed-off document of the work that needs to be doing to maintain that particular habitat. So you're looking at the amounts of scrub, the height of the grass sward, the density of the heather. And alongside that, you have a thing called the favourable condition table. So you'll have a sort of a set of criteria which has evolved over the eons, you know, over the years the National Naturalists have been going, and the research going back to the science has fed into this. So it's a very cyclical thing. But there's flexibility within each site. It's not you'll have 10% of scrub here, you'll have a tree there. So it's quite dynamic.
Okay, but we keep hearing about all these different creatures and their numbers are declining. And how do you actively try and boost them? How do you try and sort of encourage them? What do you do to sort of try and reverse that?
It depends on the site, so you have to go with what opportunities are there. So, for instance, Stodmarsh, which is it's the largest reed bed in the southeast of England. Maybe not as big as other areas, but still important. And that site, we've just had the opportunity, a large area of it acts as flood alleviation. So, you know, these sites are great for people in terms of their health, but also there's other benefits as well. So that site is a massive amount of flood alleviation site. So about 54 hectares of open water and 38 hectares of reed bed has never been managed because it's always been connected with the river. So we've just managed to secure money this year to basically get that, so come up with a bund to isolate it, and we can, for the first time ever, start managing that reed bed and maximising it. So you would never have got bitterns nesting there, because if they would have built their nest at a low tide, high tide, they would have been flooded out, or the reverse, high and dry. So it's very poor for some of the species we're trying to target. But now we've got that opportunity. We're doing a huge amount of restoration, which we also work in terms of where we're going to bring in science, and it will be a demonstration site for other sites that are around in the area. And we will target certain species that are rare or threatened and maximise the habitat. We might actually bring excavators on and lower the reed bed. We will bring culverts in, a lot of water control. So some of the sites are incredibly
But when
managed.
you do that and you intervene in that way, is there a risk you're pushing other things out that you don't realise are important, or you're in turn endangering them?
Yeah, it's always, it's a good question to ask, which is why we survey to know what's going to be there. And sometimes if you have a lot of dry reed bed or flooded out reed bed, you'll do your surveys, make sure you're not threatening anything that is equally endangered, and then you find what you have. And if you have the common, it's sometimes favouring the rare, the very rare over the very common. So you're favouring the ones that, if they're not helped by us, could go extinct long term.
Okay. And Dagmar, when we're looking at climate change and things like this, I know this is very interesting, and you're involved in this strategy. So tell us how you're embedding that into the thinking and creating space for certain different species.
Gosh, this could take a whole day's discussion, and there are many conferences and events go on discussing this topic. It's a really exciting time to be involved in the world of conservation and the thinking around nature reserve management, because we know now that little islands can be important reservoirs, but they can become very isolated. And what a lot of the thinking these days in conservation is about how we best link up our sites with other nature reserves, and we link up the landscape in between so that it's permeable for wildlife. And one really important factor there is climate change, because we know the climate's changing. We know it is going to get wetter in some areas, warmer in other areas, and there are some species are right on their climatic limit in a part of the country. If the site that they're on changes, the climate trend changes that site in the long term. If we haven't created a permeable landscape, those species or those habitats will start to erode and die away. And that's a very simplistic way of explaining it.
And when we say permeable landscape, you mean the ability to for something to move across the landscape and to sort of move maybe further north if that's what's necessary?
Yes, and you can simplistically think of that as corridors and stepping stones, but ideally it's actually a more complete landscape, so that you're not restricting things to little corridors and jumping stepping stones. And so not only are we trying to work much more with our partner organisations who manage other nature reserves, but we're also trying to work with farmers and landowners around our nature reserves to create a much more sympathetic landscape.
So that map that everyone's got here with all, it's a kind of a dot to dot almost. You're trying to link them up. You're trying to join them together.
Yes, on a much finer scale than this as well. Yeah.
I'm conscious that we're short on time. Any questions? Yes. So we've got a couple of microphones in the audience. There's one coming across to you here. There's two there. That's great. Let's start with you, madam.
Thank you. It was all very interesting, and I shall visit those sites. I've just moved to this area, but I volunteered in Surrey on Heathland for the National Trust for about 10 years. And there's a bit of a conflict. Part of their remit is to educate and encourage people to use the land. But of course, I've seen tremendous destruction. So I saw Natural England put in £10,000 to renovate one of the ponds on the heath. All the hot ponds were completely destroyed by people allowing dogs in. Now, I'm not against dogs, but it's just they didn't understand that they had to perhaps protect the ponds and not allow the dogs in there. They're just muddy puddles now. So all that work was lost. Do you get that same conflict on the sites you manage?
So it's finding a balance between people and nature, though.
Yes, because the more people that go on the land, the more pressure is on that land. And it's very, it's very delicate soil.
Yeah.
Triple SSIs.
I can give you a... Am I...
I think you are. Yeah.
I can give you a sort of a general answer about how we try and tackle that. I don't know the site that you're talking about, but the pressure on any individual site is going to vary depending on what's going on around it. The part of the country you're talking about, like much of this area, has got a very high population density and a lot of people who want to go out and enjoy the countryside. One of the areas of work that we're trying to do, particularly in some of the heathland areas, and this is beyond, it's not necessarily the work we do directly on nature reserves, it's our bigger remit, is to work with planning authorities to try and create sort of protected zones and to create alternative lands that people can, alternative places where people can take their dogs and walk and enjoy a countryside without threatening the very, very sort of special nature reserves. It's not an instant solution, but it's a long-term process we're trying to achieve.
Does anyone else want to come in on that?
On Shapwick Heath, where I am, we're one of the rare reserves we don't actually allow dogs. There's lots of nature reserves in the area, and lots of them do, but we have one large one that doesn't, so that we do have a zone where there isn't that disturbance. But I'd say our team and all the nature reserves, I don't know the site you're talking about, we very carefully sort of zone. We try and have things for people that are kind of on the edge of the reserve that will get more use, which means, and there aren't paths right into the middle of the reserve, so there's a big reservoir in the middle that we know won't get disturbed. So we do, I can only speak for myself, but we think about it very carefully because it's a real issue.
Yeah, it's really finding that balance, isn't it? And I hadn't thought actually about working with developers to find other spaces for people to use, a bit more of a neutral space to walk dogs and things. So that's great. I think there was a lady, gentleman, definitely got a beard, definitely not a lady. Hello, sir.
Not quite, got a beard. It's kind of a bit of a mixed question. I was a very close friend, Robin Hanson there. I know he used to work on the Seychelles, which is obviously fairly easy to get public engagement into natural spaces. I just want to raise the question of how do you achieve that similar kind of engagement when you're working in the UK, whereas maybe not quite so easy to get people engaged with public spaces, it's not quite so sunny and happy.
Yeah.
Just throw that on that.
Okay. Do you want to answer your friend, or should we let someone else do it? Go on.
Close friend status may have just slipped slightly.
Right, unfriended on Facebook as we speak. Okay. Engagement then. How do we get people engaged and really caring about these spaces and these nature reserves? There's
so many different ways. I think, for starters, one of the things that's fantastic that's just happened. Are we going the website? Is that all right?
They'll be used to follow it.
So
yeah.
it's using different media. It's so we're hopefully launching our own website soon. So that's obviously one way you can get engaged with people. There's where we start doing projects. For instance, for myself, I'm trying to come up with some research with Kent University. That's going to look at mindfulness and nature, synergy with that. And obviously that's going to generate evidence that can then be rolled out and used by people throughout the country. Because then a lot of the people here are going to be fascinated they're going to love wildlife already. So it's maybe not so hard to get them out and to enjoy these sites. In terms of getting people to allow their dogs not to ruin sites, allowing people to be responsible and value the countryside. Sometimes you need to get to those people who haven't already got their hearts in the countryside. So if you can start showing them the other things that they're important for, such as lowering anxiety, lowering stress, a place which for quiet enjoyment, and you can provide evidence for that, then you can start engaging people that way. So there's so many different ways to get people interested that there's not one answer, Giles. So there's quite a few. So that's just one. I could come up with others if you like, or someone else might like to.
Is it about hobbies as well? It's about sort of, it's photography or walking or, trying to engage people's hobbies with these spaces.
Absolutely. Okay, it's not the Seychelles, but I think England's a wonderfully dynamic and diverse thing. We have seasons. They're mostly wet. Most of the natures will have an active programme of educational visits, and we can look at the volunteering side, going back to that a little bit. A lot of nature reserves will have guided trails with information leaflets, downloadable trails. Robin mentioned an interesting trail at Aston Rowans, which is quite interactive. So there are many, many ways to involve. And the wildlife on our sites, I can talk about Heathland more, but we have some fascinating wildlife. It may not be tropical, but with wonderful creatures, things like a tiger beetle, which is a very fast, active predator. You can amaze people with these facts. It doesn't need to be tropical, 35 degrees C and humid. This country is stunning and diverse. And people can get to these reserves. For the vast majority, I think I'm correct in saying it's free. We're open 24/7, 365. Some may have a parking fee, but there's an absolute vast array of ways of getting involved with nature in this country. There's a lot of stuff on TV. BBC Spring Watch and Autumn Watch, I think, does an amazing job of... Plug for you there. It's opening the eyes of a lot of people who don't necessarily get out. They might live in a sort of a quite confined urban environment without the means to actually get into the countryside. So this opens the door for you. And hopefully this encourages us. And the National Nature Reserves are the best of the best. And we can provide wonderful landscapes, habitat and species, free, quite easy to see. Just come and see us.
And one of the other things that we're starting to do is look for, like these guys have said, look for new audiences. And this year, for the very first time, we're bringing national nature reserves into the National Heritage Open Days Festival, which I'm sure most people are aware, first weekend in September. Heritage sites all around the country, they throw open their doors for new experiences. And the people who go along to those aren't normally expecting to be national nature reserves. But this year, for the first year, and it's going to go on, we're bringing the heritage of national nature reserves into that festival. And hopefully that's going to, open the doors to people who are looking for a heritage site and they suddenly think, yeah, natural heritage. And we're going to show them how man's activities on those nature reserves have created the landscapes and the wildlife that are there today.
Yeah. It's great to hear there's so many ideas, actually, because that is the big challenge, isn't it? Going forward, it's the engagement, because without the will, and we don't know, very uncertain future with Brexit and where money goes in the countryside and everything else, engagement is the key, isn't it?
I think it's about making places relevant to people's daily lives, as well. And like we have cycle routes through our reserves, and so people can get from one place to another and stuff like that as well.
I also think it's the needs that are out there. So we've got a colleague actually who's in the audience, and we're looking to set up a conservation group for ex-servicemen suffering from PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. Which could be an amazing project. And once we model it, because we're not a profit organisation, once we model it, that can be replicated throughout the country, and that could be fantastic. Yeah. So it's trying to engage on all levels to all peoples as much as we can. So, hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
I'm amazed there's a colleague in the audience who hasn't asked you a tricky question yet. But we're nearly out of time. Yes, it was just time for one more. Can we get microphone across to this lady with the backpack? Oh, sorry, he's just coming forward, thanks.
We went down to a site in the Forest of Dean, Ladies Wood. It was all fenced off. We had a job to find any information. I wanted to look at the wildflowers. I emailed you. I didn't have a reply. So I was kind of left. This is a few months ago now. I find it really difficult to find information about what's there, where I can access it. It may be just that particular site. And I think it's something to do with special dormice, but I was more interested in the wildflowers. And I think the other thing is, you do a lot with butterflies, birds. A lot of this wildlife hangs on the wildflowers, like the large blue that we have in the Cotswolds. And I don't think you make enough of the wildflowers, or perhaps that's my perception.
Not making enough of wildflowers. Is that fair? I know there's been a problem with access there as well.
That's right. Well, I can only apologise for the fact that you didn't get a reply. That woodland in particular, it's a long-term study site, and it's called a minimum intervention, which is why it's not as accessible as some of our sites, because part of the point of it is to study a wood that's not disturbed. But I'm still apologising that whoever didn't get back to you. In terms of working more with plants, one of the things we've been doing recently is setting up. We're working at a national level, which is something I'm involved in with some of our major partners who manage other national nature reserves and other aspects of wildlife, one of which is plant life. And we're looking at projects that we can do together with plant life. And we're thinking in particular, there's one in Wiltshire that I'm involved in, where we're actually working with that very plant-based organisation.
There's another project within Nurturing, and we have now across the suite of NRs a thing called the Long-Term Monitoring Network, and one of the projects in that is to have fixed quadrats across looking specifically at vegetation. We bring in climate data and other species data, but this will be very intense, done every 4 years, and there's one just happened in Surrey just this last week, actually. So that's very detailed, and it'll build up a very big picture of the wildflowers, the mosses, the lichens, the trees and shrubs, and that will form a very long chain of information which can build into climate change mentioned earlier. So they're certainly not ignored. It's one of the underpinning things of a lot of sites, how the vegetation, obviously, and the insects and all the other things that rely on that food chain. So it is taken very seriously, and a lot of study is done on that.
So so you'll all every NNR has a management plan. It's a legal document, and that will be very clearly, it will be based in ecology, so it's scientifically based. And even if you have a species such as bittern, if you don't get the read right and the abiotic factors right, so the water levels right or whatever, the water quality, you're not going to get your target species. So you have to manage. And obviously, as James has said, at the bottom of the food chain, mostly is plant-based. So, and sometimes that is the target community or species. So Aston Row up the road, it's chalk grassland. So the target management there is completely focused at that rich plant assemblage. So it's directly managed for that. And it's also obviously the butterflies. There's butterfly surveys that are done. They've been done for years. The yellow meadow ants, we've got a professor who's been studying them for 30 or 40 years in an area about 4 times the size of this theatre here, and that's what he's been studying only. But it's all about the plant in that particular site. So yeah, it's interesting that you feel that, and maybe that's one of the things that we work with in our engagement to make sure that comes across more. So thank you for raising the question, for definite.
And Robin seems very keen to give his email address out to everyone, so I'm sure next time you can't get into a site, you can just email him. Well, look, thank you for joining us. I think we have run out of time there. So a huge thanks to Dagmar, to Robin, to James, to Julie for their time today and explaining all those great tips and places you can go and explore. So thank you very much.